Card number 36, it's Paul's conversion. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." If you ask me what caused Saul's conversion, I think there's only one answer possible, and that is the sovereign grace of God through Jesus Christ. Because Saul did not set out that day on his way to Damascus with this in mind: I want to become a follower of Christ. On the contrary, he was persecuting Christ and his followers. It was rather that Christ made the decision and he intervened in Paul's life. And the evidence of this is indisputable. For this is what it means to be born of God. Just like you had nothing to do with your birth, so you will have nothing to do with the initial spiritual birth, because it's a work of God. Let me try to paint a picture for you to understand, I think, what takes place here. Now, I love sailing, and I am, say, in the middle of the ocean somewhere when I see or hear what sounds like a helicopter coming my way. And I look in the direction of the sound, and sure enough, there is a helicopter coming my way, and it has something dangling underneath it. As it comes closer, I hear a message from a loudspeaker saying that there has been a massive earthquake some 200 kilometers away, and that it has generated a massive tsunami wave of 100 meters high, and it's coming towards us at 100 k's an hour. Now, we will lower the basket, was their message. And when you get in, we'll bring it up and we'll take you back to the aircraft carrier, which we believe can ride out this wave. So that's the scene. So what would you do if that were you? I mean, 5 minutes ago, you knew nothing about the danger. Now you've been made aware of it. Now, I will suggest that now that you know this, you will jump in and get back to safety. And it's being made aware that has made the difference. But you would do nothing if you had not been made aware of what was ahead of you. You see, and the same is true spiritually. Look at how the Bible describes our natural spiritual condition. It says the natural person, that's the unconverted person, does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they're foolishness to him or her. And they are not able to understand them. Why? Because it takes the Spirit to discern them. And that's what 1 Corinthians 2:14 says. And then it says, "And you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and therefore were by nature children of wrath, just like the rest of mankind." And that's Ephesians chapter 2 in the first 3 verses. "And this is the judgment, that light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light." Why? Because their deeds are evil, as that says in John chapter 3 and verse 19 from memory. You see, there are many other words that depict our war against God in the Bible. And this is true of everyone. From the sweetest grandmother that you know to the murder serving life in prison. We are blind to the truth, and it takes God to take the initiative to cause us to see the reality of this truth. When I knew that there was disaster coming my way in my little story, it was being made aware of the true situation that I was facing that allowed me to decide to do something about it. I made the decision to get out of there. Or I could have decided to stay and be destroyed. I wasn't being compelled to go against my will, but being made aware of the truth made me willing to make that life-changing decision. Well, that's what happened, I think, to Paul, because we've got to ask what brought him to faith. We read that the light, and we hear of a voice, and the assistants that were with Saul heard and saw the same thing, but there's no record of them becoming Christ's followers. But Saul was blinded and he needed help to finish the rest of his journey to Damascus. And in this state of blindness for 3 days, it gave him plenty of time to think through what had happened to him and who it was that spoke to him. "Who are you, Lord?" he asked. And Jesus answered, "I am Jesus whom you have persecuted." Saul must have grasped from the extraordinary way in which Jesus identified with his followers that to persecute them was to persecute him, and that Jesus was alive and his claims were true. There could be no misunderstanding what had happened. The risen Lord had appeared to Saul. It was not a vision or a dream. It was an objective appearance of the resurrected and now glorified Jesus Christ. The light he saw was the glory of Christ, and the voice he heard was the voice of Christ. And Christ had interrupted his headlong career of persecution and had turned him around to face in the opposite direction. It's not every day that something like that happens to a person. And I believe that Saul had listened to the gospel before as he researched this heretical sect, for that's how he would have viewed the Christians. And we know that he was there when Stephen gave his address, and only God knew how many other messages he'd listened to. So Saul's conversion was not a violation of his will. It called on his reasoning to view what was now before him. That is, Christ, who had appeared to him and spoke to him, did not crush him. He humbled him so that he fell on the ground, and where Jesus put to him a probing question, "Why do you persecute me?" He was appealing to his reason and his conscience in order to bring into his consciousness the folly and the evil of what he was doing. Jesus then told him to get up and go into the city where he would be told what to do next. Saul was not overcome by the vision or the voice that had told him or spoke to him. No, he answered Jesus' questions with two counter questions. First, "Who are you, Lord?" in verse 5. And secondly, "What shall I do, Lord?" Now his response was rational. It was reasoned and it was free. And he calls Jesus Kyrios, Lord. That would show that a new recognition was forming in Saul's mind. And this conversion would probably have laid the foundation for what he said in Romans 10, where he describes saving faith as requiring the confession with your mouth that Jesus is Kyrios, Jesus is Lord, and belief in his heart, in the heart that God had raised him from the dead. You see, conversion is an instantaneous experience that is invisible. It's like the wind that Jesus said in John chapter 3. It's like the falling of the first domino, if you've ever played dominoes, that sets the rest in motion, and a landslide of events within the heart and within heaven itself take place. And you know that the conversion of Saul took place in this encounter, for Ananias was sent to visit him. Saul was praying when Ananias arrived. Well, Ananias is a disciple of Jesus, and he came as directed by the Lord and laid his hands on Saul so that he could receive his sight, and he was filled with the Holy Spirit, as it says in verse 17. Then Saul was baptized, and one assumes by Ananias, and then he eats for the first time after a 3-day fast. How wonderful those words would have been to both the speaker and the hearer, "Brother Saul." For Ananias to think that he knew that this man intent was to drag him to prison and even kill him. And for Saul to think that now this man was his brother. Only the grace of God can transform like this. So Saul starts his preaching to his fellow countrymen in the local synagogue that Jesus was the Son of God. And Saul increased all the more in strength and confounded the Jews who lived in Damascus by proving that Jesus was the Christ. Sometime after his preaching in Damascus, according to Galatians 1:17, he went away into Arabia, where he spent 3 years being taught by the Lord. Now, see the link here. The 12 disciples spent 3 years with Jesus. Now Saul spends the same time being taught by the Lord. And after 3 years in the desert with the Lord, he receives his understanding of what he calls the mystery made known to me by revelation, or my gospel, or the gospel I received by revelation from Jesus Christ. Now Saul is ready to expound and to explain the gospel from Jesus. And after this, he returns to Damascus, but this didn't end well, for the Jews could not rebuff Saul, nor were they willing to confess that Jesus is Lord. So they set up a plot to kill him. Well, knowing this threat, Saul escapes by being lowered in a basket down the city walls, and he heads for Jerusalem. And when he got there, he hit a brick wall. No one would accept him. Well, thankfully, Barnabas befriended him and opened the door to fellowship with the church and its leaders. So he went in and out among them at Jerusalem, preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. And he spoke and disputed against the Hellenists, but they were seeking to kill him. And then thankfully, when the brothers learned this, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him back home to Tarsus. Now we will meet up with Saul very soon, for Barnabas goes to Tarsus after Saul had worked in that area for some 5 or 6 years. And Barnabas goes and brings him to teach in Antioch, which will become the center of world missions. And Saul plays a key part. But first, the door needs to be opened into the Gentile world by Peter.